It is time for the Bugajski hot seat, and our guest today is the U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Philip Reeker. Welcome to the show, Philip.
Thank you, Janusz.
Thank you for making the time during your busy schedule not just in Tirana, but throughout Albania.
It's a pleasure.
Just a little background on the ambassador for our audience. Phil is responsible at the State Department for U.S. relations with the entire region. In other words, not just with Albania, but Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croatia, Kosovo, Macedonia, Montenegro, and Serbia. He has also served as U.S. ambassador to Macedonia and has extensive and in-depth experience throughout the Western Balkans. So let us jump straight into the questions, Phil.
Sure.
And let me begin actually with the broader region, and then we can zero in a little bit on Albania. What would you say are the core U.S. priorities in this region?
I think it's fairly straightforward. We want to see this region integrated into a Europe which is whole, free, democratic, at peace, and increasingly prosperous. That has been, of course, our goal in U.S. foreign policy for Europe since World War II. It's been shared by presidents and secretaries of state from both political parties over many years, and we've made great strides in that realm. If you look at the enlargement of NATO, which is an open door for new members, including Albania, if you look at the European Union and our efforts to work with our European partners to bring these countries in to help them with the reforms necessary to become candidates for EU membership, and then the difficult path through accession to join the European Union. And we've seen that in Slovenia, of course, but by this time next year, Croatia will be a full member of the EU, and there's a European perspective for all the countries of the Western Balkans. So that's very much our policy, our goals. We have strong relationships here. We have embassies staffed with excellent diplomats, and we very much appreciate our relationships with each of the countries in the region.
And what would you say, looking at the region, particularly as you've been here for many years, you understand many of the problems, the challenges, what would you say are still the outstanding challenges to be resolved, threats to be overcome? I don't want you necessarily to go into worst case scenarios, but what are the sort of still unresolved issues in this region?
I think all of the countries in the region are still consolidating democracy, focusing on building the institutions that are necessary for successful free market democracy, and that's something that takes time. If you look back over the past 2 decades, the progress has really been extraordinary. And being here in Albania during this centennial year, when you think of 1 century, 100 years of Albania's independence, to think of what has been accomplished just since the end of the Hoxha era is really quite remarkable. There is still much work to be done, and the path towards Europe, towards EU membership, very much lays that out. Reforms that are well defined through the European perspective, particularly in the area of rule of law, in the area of judiciary. These are critical institutions that involve reform, revolve a new way of thinking for many people of the region. It's something we, through our assistance programs, have tried to continue to work on with these countries, and it will continue to take time.
Is it a sort of generational question, would you say, to some degree? In other words, the younger generation has no experience of the old communist period, is more familiar with democratic values, with the West and so forth. Presumably that's the generation that will, let's say, consolidate all the progress that these countries have made.
I think that's true to a broad degree. It is something that takes time, that requires new ways of thinking, and in the world in which we live today, where communication is so instantaneous, where social media connects people like never before, some of the long-held beliefs, some of the mythology that's been peculiar to the Balkan region is slowly disappearing. And they're realizing that borders can be used to unite, not to divide. That's the goal of the European Union. And if you look at what Europe has accomplished since the end of the Second World War, where former enemies are now completely united, economically, politically, working together for standards of living, for levels of prosperity, despite the current challenges in the global economic situation. These are levels of prosperity that were never imagined before.
It's interesting, you mentioned how, presumably how Germans and French and Germans and Poles have managed to reconcile after these changes and are now good partners within the European Union. Do you see that happening between neighbors here? Because there are still, as you know, some outstanding disputes, to mention but a few, between Macedonia and Greece, even between Montenegro and Serbia, certainly between Serbia and Kosovo. Do you see these questions being resolved in the framework of accession towards the European Union, accession into the European Union?
I think that's very much the goal of that. And as the other countries in Western Europe have demonstrated, these things can be overcome by taking a new approach, by putting the past behind and looking toward the future. This is what our goal has been in terms of encouraging integration, Euro-Atlantic integration. What can the United States and our European partners do for the countries of this region? We can help them make the changes necessary to be eligible and come into these institutions. It still takes a lot of work. It's not perfect. So the countries of the EU have to work together all the time. They have to focus on compromise. And that's a word that needs to be learned in this region. For too long in the Balkans, the idea has been that there is only capitulation. That is not the key to success in the 21st century. Compromise can mean positives for both countries, for all people of the region. And I think you have seen a lot of that. You see great cooperation, working together through NATO or the Partnership for Peace, through structures like the Adriatic, the A5, where countries are working together on security issues, on stability issue, where through integrated border management between and among countries of the region, you see great progress in terms of law enforcement, in terms of interdicting trafficking in narcotics, trafficking in human beings. These are the types of steps that are vitally important, and it's what our programs have been designed to support.
You mentioned the European Union. What is the degree of coordination, would you say, between the United States, between Washington and Brussels in terms of its approach towards the region?
We work very closely together with our European partners. Obviously, the United States is not a member of the European Union. We don't have a vote at the European Council or a veto. But we determined long ago that it was in our interest as well, and the interest of all of Europe, all of the transatlantic, trans-European space, to bring these countries of the Western Balkans into these institutions. And so we coordinate closely. Our assistance program, the billions of dollars that the United States has invested in this region since the early 90s, are all designed to help these countries meet the requirements and expectations, to help them on the reform agenda for EU membership. And of course, NATO membership is very much a part of that. NATO has proved to be the most successful security alliance in human history, I think quite arguably. And you don't see NATO countries going to war with each other. Instead, you see a political and security institution which allows countries to resolve their problems and increasingly work together to deal with security threats from outside the region as well.
As you know, and I'm sure you've heard expressed, there is a fear, I hear, among some people that America's going to withdraw, a divided Europe, an uncertain European Union is going to take over responsibility for the region. How would you address that in terms of US approach now as compared to when the crisis was in the Balkans 10, 15 years ago?
Well, I think you just look at the progress that has been made. There are still challenges, as you pointed out, in this region. There are still issues that need to be and should be resolved. But you don't have the threat of war and major violence. And the United States is very committed to this region. Secretary Clinton takes a great interest in this region.
Great personal interest.
A great personal interest, and so has every administration. And you can see it through our presence here. Every one of the countries of the region has a major U.S. embassy presence, engaged in so many areas to, again, help our partners and friends make the necessary reforms required to move forward, to achieve their goals, to keep open the door of NATO and EU membership. because that's what people increasingly throughout the region have said they want. They want to be a part of this Europe whole and free, a part of the 21st century, not looking backwards to the horrors of the late 20th century and, of course, the 19th century before that.
Right. Looking now more at Albania's progress towards the European Union. I mean, nobody can give us a timeline of when Albania will be a member. But what is it? What are the priorities? What are the main things that the government has to do to qualify for accession?
Well, I think the EU set out a very good list of recommendations, 12 recommendations that were needed to become a full candidate, to achieve candidate status. And that's what the government should be focused on. The time is really now. We all know that there's been disappointment at the pace of reforms. They slowed greatly when politics got in the way of progress, when individual agendas and political parties took precedence over the well-being and the future of the whole country. And now is the opportunity to make some real strides, even in the next few weeks, as EU officials have pointed out, before the European Commission issues its next progress report, with the hope that Albania could achieve the candidate status by the end of this year, and then move forward into the very difficult process necessary to begin accession talks, and ultimately, as we've seen with other countries in the region, become full members.
I'm often asked the question regarding EU membership. By the time Albania is ready to enter, what kind of European Union will exist? I know you can't forecast, but the question is, how can we reassure the Albanians that it's to their benefit, regardless of when they get in, to pursue these reforms? It's not just a question, presumably, of membership, but it's good for the country to have these reforms completed, implemented.
Well, I think we've all seen what the EU has done for its member states in terms of not only consolidating peace and stability, but helping the countries of the European Union be competitive in the 21st century. It's a question of markets. It's a question of competing not only with North America, but increasingly with Asia in the modern economy, which is very much interconnected. And we can see that in the European Union itself, but right here in Albania. What happens next door economically affects what happens here. And the reforms that the European Union requires for membership are very much chartered to moving the country into a modern competitive economy where institutions reflect democratic values, reflect open economies, and so that Albania or any other country in the region can be part of something much bigger.
In terms of regional cooperation, you mentioned how important this is, and there are many examples from European Union, Benelux, Visegrad, and so forth, of countries successfully cooperating. In the case of the West Balkans, regional security, economic development, how important are things like energy security, infrastructure, transportation, other regional connections? And can Albania play an important role in these spheres?
Well, I think energy is clearly a critical matter. It's important for economic growth. It has implications for geopolitical questions. It's important for security, economic security, and broader questions of stability. So it's important that countries think together of how they can together address their energy challenges. And we see that whether it's questions of potential pipelines in the region that can help bring energy sources here. Increasingly, countries and people have to work together. Small, isolated markets are not going to be as successful as those who work together. And that's what, of course, the European Union and common markets are all about.
Would you support a regional common market? There have been some suggestions, some proposals quite recently talked about in the region. Some countries would oppose it. Others would support it. Do you see, particularly in this part, in the Western Balkans, some sort of regional market that can enhance give added value to each country, so to speak?
I think really what countries in this region should focus on is their European perspective. The course is well laid out for them, what needs to be done. It's what we support, is the open door to NATO, the open door to European Union membership, and that's what we've worked very closely with our European partners on, and with each country in the region.
And in terms of this regional cooperation, you mentioned energy and infrastructure and communications. Should America be playing more of a role here, do you think?
I think we play a large role. We want to make sure that markets here are open to potential U.S. investors. We try to encourage opportunities for U.S. investors as well as investors from around the world, and that's why transparency is so critical. That's why rule of law is absolutely essential.
Sure.
U.S. investors tell me, they come, they take a look at the region, they want to be sure that their contracts are sacrosanct, that they have recourse to a judicial system that is fair and balanced, that there's a level playing field. And that's, again, what the reform process is very much about, the importance of independent institutions, independent judiciary. It's a competitive world out there, and capital will go where it is safest. And so I think American companies, American investors have a long history of taking a look at challenges. They're willing to invest, but they have to know that there is a level playing field and know that the rule of law will prevail.
Let me ask you a couple other questions about the region. You're going to Kosovo next, I gather, to Pristina. What is the purpose of your trip there? I know it's of great interest to people in Albania.
Well, I've had the opportunity to visit Kosovo several times in the past year since I assumed these responsibilities. This time I'll be going to meet with the International Steering Group, where we expect to take a decision to end supervision of Kosovo's independence. That will mean the end of the International Civilian Office. And as we've already seen, Kosovo's parliament has taken steps to approve constitutional amendments and legislation necessary to take over these requirements in line with the comprehensive settlement proposal. And so it's an important time for Kosovo. It shows they have made great strides in their little over 4 years of independence. But of course, there's much more to do. And they will have to be focused and disciplined in working together, in setting aside petty politics and individual agendas, in working for the common good of the country.
And I presume part of your job is to gauge the mood and offer suggestions to different capitals in terms of regional cooperation, resolving some of the outstanding problems. I know you've been to Belgrade since Nikolić's election. How do you see that relationship between Kosovo and Serbia?
Well, I think it will be important for Serbia with its new government to focus on normalization of the relationship and the contacts with Pristina. This is what the European Union has made very clear is going to be necessary for Serbia to take the next steps towards its goal of European Union membership. Serbia achieved candidacy status earlier this year, and in order to move into the accession process, Brussels has been very clear, along with member states, that certain reforms are going to have to take place, and there is going to need to be progress in dialogue with Pristina. I think that's very doable. I think we saw a number of agreements that were reached through the EU-led dialogue earlier this year. Those agreements need to be fully implemented as a very first step, and then look at taking the next steps to come to a more normal situation.
Last couple of questions. You served, of course, as ambassador in Macedonia. The name dispute, and it's actually broader than simply the name, with Greece, continues to fester, and it blocks Macedonia's progress to both important institutions, NATO and the EU. Can you see any light at the end of the tunnel in resolution?
I've always been able to see a resolution. I've always hoped for a way forward. I think it's tragic that there hasn't been progress in that regard. No one more than the United States wants to see Macedonia move forward on its Euro-Atlantic agenda. At Bucharest, a decision was taken. We want to see Macedonia become a full member of NATO. We want to see them progress through accession talks to become a member of the European Union. That's good for Greece, it's good for the region, it's good for Europe and for the whole transatlantic space. So I hope that both countries will be able to work together. They have the good offices of Ambassador Nimitz and the United Nations, a process through which they can find, again, a compromise, a way forward to see that this process is unblocked. It's an important step. I think it will be a historic step, and we certainly hope that it will happen.
And important for Albania as well, to have a neighbor that's within two major
Exactly, and I
institutions.
think you know, it's one of the issues I've stressed, or one of the themes I've pursued here, is the important role Albania has played as a constructive actor within the region. And I've encouraged the leadership here to continue to play that role. I think Albania is a strong friend to its neighbor Macedonia. It's a strong friend to Kosovo. It can play a very positive role diplomatically and as a good friend, a good neighbor and partner. And certainly we have a very strong, the United States has a very strong partnership with Albania. We're very pleased to see Albania as a full member and ally in NATO. And I think we have a very strong commitment to each other. And that is whether we're serving together in Afghanistan, or whether we're working together on reform efforts or some of the initiatives that Ambassador Arvizu has undertaken recently to promote citizen involvement in their communities, to promote efforts to improve services and lives for all the citizens in Albania.
Last question, 100th year anniversary of Albanian statehood. How would you sort of summarize the main drivers of that relationship, the Albanian-American relationship, obviously with huge historical, let's say, anchors? How would you describe that relationship now? What holds that together?
Well, I think it's based on a long-standing friendship. There's a strong diaspora of Albanians in the United States. We have supported Albania's transition, its reforms, its progress, and we want to continue to do that. And we find Albania to be, as I said, a constructive player in the region. We want to see them do that. We also want to, as friends, speak out and talk about the need to continue the reform effort, to refocus energy, to make sure that independent democratic institutions are respected, to work on judicial reforms, to stress the importance of rule of law, to deal with corruption. These are the things that I think average Albanians are concerned about. And this is what will take Albania into new directions in its next 100 years. And we, the United States, expect to be a friend in that process.
Good. We won't be around then, of course, but...
Speak for yourself.
Anyway, Phil, thanks very much for being with me and being on the show, for your thoughts and insights and candor. And best of luck in your important work. Hopefully have you back here next time you're coming through Tirana.
Thank you, Janusz. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. And see you in Washington.
Okay.